Nathan Pierce stood in his penthouse bathroom, staring at the reflection of a man he barely recognized anymore. At 34 years old, he had built a technology empire that revolutionized digital security systems across the globe. His company employed thousands, his investments shaped markets, and his name appeared in business magazines monthly. Yet the man looking back at him seemed hollow, worn down by the constant performance his life demanded. He reached for the designer cologne on the marble counter, then stopped. Tonight would be different. Tonight, he would not be Nathan Pierce, the billionaire tech mogul. He would simply be Nathan, a man seeking something his fortune could never buy: authentic human connection. The community book fair in Brooklyn seemed an unlikely place for someone of his status. But that was precisely the point. Nathan had discovered the event while scrolling through local happenings, searching for somewhere he could blend into the background. He dressed carefully in worn jeans, a comfortable flannel shirt, scuffed sneakers he had purchased specifically for occasions like this. The contrast to his usual $1,000 suits was jarring, yet liberating. The fair's magic, the book fair, occupied a converted warehouse, space filled with natural light streaming through industrial windows. Rows of tables displayed used books, handmade journals, and literary artwork. The air smelled of old paper, coffee, and possibility. Nathan felt his shoulders relax as he entered. Anonymous among the crowd of book lovers browsing the collections, he wandered through the aisles, genuinely enjoying the freedom to touch books without assistants hovering nearby. His fingers traced the spines of classic novels, philosophy texts, and poetry collections. For the first time in months, nobody watched him with calculated interest or approached with business proposals disguised as friendly conversation. Meeting Grace, the small bookstore booth tucked in the corner, caught his attention. Unlike the other vendors with their haphazard displays, this one was arranged with obvious care. Books were organized by theme rather than genre, creating unexpected conversations between titles. A hand-lettered sign read "Mitchell's Corner Books, where stories find their people." Behind the table sat a woman who seemed completely absorbed in her own book, occasionally glancing up to smile at passers-by but never pushing them to stop. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and reading glasses perched on her nose. She wore a simple green sweater and jeans, completely unremarkable except for the way she seemed utterly content in her own world. Nathan found himself drawn to the display, picking up a worn copy of poetry by a writer he had never heard of. The book fell open to a page marked with a pressed flower. "That one is special," the woman said, looking up from her reading. Her voice carried warmth, without any sales pitch. "The author is local, barely known, but incredibly talented. I keep multiple copies because people always fall in love with it." "You sound like you know the writer," Nathan replied, intrigued by her genuine enthusiasm. "I published their first collection through my bookstore," she said, setting down her own book and giving him her full attention. Small press, nothing fancy, but it mattered to them. Sometimes that matters more than big publishers and marketing budgets. Nathan felt something shift in his chest. This woman spoke about meaningful work with the same passion he had once felt about technology before his company became more about profit margins than innovation. A genuine connection. "I am Nathan," he said, extending his hand across the table. "Grace Mitchell," she replied, her handshake firm and warm. "Do you read much poetry?" "I used to," Nathan admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Work has consumed most of my reading time lately. I miss it, actually. The way good poetry makes you see ordinary things differently." Grace's face lit up with understanding. "Exactly. That is what I try to explain to people. Poetry is not just pretty words. It is a way of paying attention to life more carefully." They began discussing books, and Nathan felt himself relaxing into conversation in a way he had not experienced in years. Grace did not ask about his job or income. She did not assess his value or calculate how knowing him might benefit her. She simply talked about stories and ideas and the ways literature connected people across time and distance. "What do you do for work?" Grace eventually asked, and Nathan felt his carefully constructed facade wobble. "I work in technology," he said, which was technically true. "Security systems, mostly." "Nothing particularly exciting?" Grace laughed, a sound completely free of artifice. "I always thought technology was exciting. All those systems and codes creating invisible structures that hold the modern world together. It sounds like building cathedrals that nobody can see. Nathan blinked, genuinely moved by her perspective. Nobody had ever described his work that way. In his circles, technology was about market disruption, profit potential, and competitive advantage. Grace saw it as invisible architecture, something almost beautiful. The invitation? "Would you like to get coffee?" Nathan asked, the words emerging before he fully thought them through. "I know you are working, but maybe when the fair closes." Grace studied him for a moment, and Nathan felt genuinely nervous. Not the calculated anxiety of billion-dollar negotiations, but the raw vulnerability of wanting someone to say yes without knowing if they would. "I would like that," Grace said finally, her smile reaching her eyes. "The fair ends at 6. There is a cafe 2 blocks from here that makes excellent espresso. Very nonsense. Just good coffee and quiet corners for conversation." "Perfect," Nathan said, meaning it completely, as he walked away from her booth carrying the poetry book he had purchased. Nathan felt something he had not experienced in years. Hope, not the strategic optimism of business ventures, but genuine human hope that something real might be beginning. He had no idea how long he could maintain his disguise or what would happen when Grace learned the truth. For now, though, he simply looked forward to coffee with a woman who saw invisible cathedrals in technology and believed stories could find their people. The cafe Grace had chosen was everything Nathan needed it to be. Small, unpretentious, with mismatched furniture and walls lined with local artwork. The kind of place where people came to actually talk rather than be seen. Nathan arrived 10 minutes early, his heart beating faster than it had during any boardroom presentation. Grace walked in right at 6. Still wearing her green sweater, but with her hair down now, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. She spotted him immediately and waved, weaving through the tables with an easy grace that made her name seem perfectly chosen. "I was worried you might change your mind," Nathan admitted as she sat down. "Why would I do that?" Grace asked, genuinely puzzled. "We were having a good conversation. Those are rare enough that I would never abandon one halfway through." They ordered coffee, and the conversation picked up exactly where it had left off at the book fair. Grace told him about opening her bookstore 5 years ago. How everyone had told her it was financial suicide in the age of online retailers. She had done it anyway, creating a space that felt more like a community living room than a store. "People need places that are not trying to extract maximum value from every interaction," Grace explained, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "My bookstore barely breaks even most months, but it matters to the neighborhood. Parents bring their children for story time. Lonely people come to browse and end up chatting with other customers. A book club meets there every Thursday night. That has value, even if it does not show up on a profit statement." Nathan listened, fascinated. He had spent years optimizing every aspect of his business for maximum efficiency and return. Grace had built something deliberately inefficient because inefficiency created space for human connection. 6 weeks of discovery, their coffee meeting stretched into 3 hours. When they finally left the cafe, Nathan asked if he could see her again. Grace said yes without hesitation. Something fundamental shifted in Nathan's carefully ordered world. Over the next 6 weeks, they fell into a pattern. Nathan would finish his essential business obligations by early afternoon, then spend the rest of his day in Grace's world. He learned to move through the city differently, taking subways instead of private cars, eating at neighborhood restaurants instead of exclusive establishments. He met Grace at her bookstore, a cozy space in Park Slope filled with overstuffed chairs and floor-tizzling shelves. She showed him her favorite hidden corners, the rare first editions she had collected over years of patient searching, the children's section she had designed to feel like a magical forest. "This is my real wealth," Grace said one afternoon, gesturing at the shelves surrounding them. "Every book represents a conversation I had with someone, a connection made, a story that found its person. I would not trade this for anything." Nathan felt guilt twist in his stomach. He owned 3 homes, a private jet, and a car collection worth millions. Yet standing in Grace's bookstore, surrounded by her genuine passion, he felt poor in ways that had nothing to do with money. Deepening feelings, they took long walks through Prospect Park, talking about everything from childhood dreams to philosophical questions about meaning and purpose. Grace shared her struggles growing up in a working-class family. Watching her parents work multiple jobs to keep their family housed and fed, she had put herself through college, working nights at a bookstore that eventually inspired her to open her own. "My mother still worries I should have become a lawyer or doctor," Grace said, laughing softly. "Something stable and respectable. But I wake up excited about my work." How many people can say that? Nathan could not say that. He woke up to alarm clocks set by assistants, his days choreographed down to 15-minute intervals. He attended meetings about quarterly projections and strategic initiatives, conversations that felt increasingly meaningless. With Grace, he rediscovered parts of himself he had forgotten existed. She challenged his ideas, made him laugh, introduced him to small pleasures he had overlooked in his pursuit of success. They shared cheap pizza on Brooklyn rooftops, watched sunset from the Brooklyn Bridge, browsed used bookstores in the village. Grace told him about her dream of eventually publishing more local authors, creating a small press that gave voice to writers that big publishers overlooked. Her eyes shone when she talked about it, completely unconcerned that the profit margins would be minimal. "Some things matter more than money," she said simply. And Nathan felt the words like an indictment of everything his life had become. The growing deception. Nathan knew he should tell her the truth. Every day that passed made the deception worse. But every time he resolved to confess, fear paralyzed him. He watched how Grace treated him as an equal, how she split bills with him at restaurants, how she showed him her world without any self-consciousness or apology. He noticed small things, the way she carefully budgeted for their dates, choosing activities she could afford, how proud she was when her bookstore had a particularly good sales month, the thoughtfulness with which she chose gifts for him, books she had selected specifically based on conversations they had shared. If she knew the truth, all of that would change. She would wonder if he judged her modest apartment, her second-hand furniture, her careful financial planning. The easy equality between them would evaporate, replaced by the imbalance his wealth created in every relationship. So Nathan continued his careful omission, hating himself more each day, but unable to risk losing what they had built, Grace's growing awareness. Grace was not oblivious to the inconsistencies. Nathan noticed her studying him sometimes with thoughtful eyes, as if trying to solve a puzzle she could not quite articulate. She asked careful questions. How he could afford to take so much time away from work. Why his phone never seemed to ring with the urgent calls that plagued most people in demanding careers. The expensive watch he forgot to remove one day, which he explained away as a family heirloom. "You can tell me anything," Grace said one evening as they walked along the waterfront. "You know that, right? I care about who you are, not what you have or what you do." Nathan's throat tightened. "I know," he managed to say, the lie of omission burning in his chest. A perfect evening their 6th week together culminated in an evening that felt perfect in its simplicity. Grace had invited Nathan to a reading at her bookstore, featuring the local poet whose work he had purchased at the book fair. The store was packed with neighborhood residents, all crammed into the space with wine and plastic cups and genuine appreciation for the art being shared. Nathan sat in the back watching Grace introduce the poet with obvious pride and affection. She had created this, he realized. Not just a business, but a genuine community built around shared love of stories. After the reading, as they cleaned up together, Grace turned to him suddenly. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I wanted you to know that. No expectations, no pressure. Just the truth." Nathan felt his heart break and soar simultaneously. "I am already in love with you," he replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They kissed, surrounded by books. And Nathan knew he could not let this continue without honesty. Tomorrow, he promised himself, tomorrow he would tell her everything, regardless of the consequences. But tomorrow would bring revelations neither of them anticipated, in ways Nathan could never have prepared for. Nathan woke up the morning after their kiss with absolute resolve. Today would be the day he told Grace everything. He had rehearsed the conversation 100 times in his mind, trying to find words that would make her understand why he had hidden the truth for so long. He texted Grace, asking to meet her for lunch at a quiet restaurant in her neighborhood. She responded with a heart emoji and agreed immediately. Nathan spent the morning pacing his penthouse, practicing his confession, terrified of losing the best thing that had ever happened to him. What Nathan did not know was that the decision had already been taken out of his hands. The charity announcement. Grace had arrived at her bookstore that morning to find her email inbox filled with messages about a major charity initiative. The Pierce Foundation, funded by tech billionaire Nathan Pierce, had announced a nationwide literacy program. The announcement included photos of the founder. Grace's world tilted sideways as she recognized the face staring back at her from the screen. Nathan. Her Nathan. Except he was not her Nathan at all. He was Nathan Pierce, founder and CEO of SecureTech Systems, with a net worth that made her head spin. The articles described his penthouse in Manhattan, his revolutionary security patents, his reputation as one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the technology sector. Grace sat down heavily in her desk chair, feeling physically sick. For 6 weeks, she had shared her struggles with money, her pride in making her bookstore viable, her modest dreams of expanding someday. She had carefully budgeted for their dates, chosen affordable activities, split bills with him because she believed in equality between partners, and all the while he had been a billionaire, playing at being ordinary. Watching her navigate a world he could buy and sell without thinking twice. The confrontation. Grace did not cancel their lunch. She needed to see his face when she confronted him, needed to understand how someone could deceive her so completely while claiming to love her. She arrived at the restaurant first, choosing a table by the window. Her hands shook slightly as she waited, anger and heartbreak warring inside her chest. When Nathan walked in, smiling that genuine smile she had fallen in love with, she felt something inside her crack. "Grace," he said warmly, leaning down to kiss her cheek. She turned her head and confusion flickered across his face. "Sit down, Nathan," she said quietly. "Or should I call you Nathan Pierce, founder of SecureTech Systems?" The color drained from Nathan's face. He sat down slowly, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "Grace, let me explain," he finally managed. "Explain what?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "Explain how you lied to me for 6 weeks. How you watched me worry about my bookstore's finances while you have more money than I can even comprehend. How you let me believe we were equals when the entire foundation of our relationship was built on deception." "I never lied to you," Nathan said desperately. "Everything I told you about my feelings, about who I am as a person, that was all true." "You lied by omission," Grace replied, her hands clenched in her lap. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I split bills with you, Nathan. I chose cheap restaurants because I thought we were both working professionals trying to make ends meet. I showed you my tiny apartment in my used furniture and felt proud of what I had built. And you were probably comparing it all to your penthouse and your wealth and feeling sorry for me?" "No," Nathan said firmly, reaching across the table. Grace pulled her hands away. "Grace, please. I never pitied you. If anything, I envied you. You have built something real and meaningful. You wake up passionate about your work. You have created genuine community and connection. I have money, but I lost myself somewhere along the way to getting it. The heart of the betrayal that does not give you the right to deceive me," Grace said, her voice breaking. "You should have trusted me enough to tell me the truth. You should have given me the choice to decide if I wanted to be with Nathan Pierce as Billionaire. Instead of making that decision for me—" "I was terrified of losing you," Nathan admitted, his own eyes glistening with tears. "Every relationship I have had since making my fortune has been corrupted by money. People see dollar signs instead of a person. They calculate their interactions with me. You were the first person in years who saw me as just a man, and I could not bear to lose that. So you took away my agency instead," Grace said. "You decided what I could handle, what I deserved to know. That is not love, Nathan. That is control disguised as protection." The words hit Nathan like physical blows. She was right. In trying to preserve their connection, He had built it on a foundation of sand. "You are absolutely right," Nathan said quietly. "I was selfish and cowardly. I told myself I was protecting what we had, but really I was protecting myself from the possibility of rejection. I am sorry, Grace. I am so deeply sorry." The separation, Grace stood up, gathering her coat. "I need time," she said. "I need to figure out if the person I fell in love with actually exists, or if he was just a character you were playing." "He exists," Nathan said urgently, standing as well. "Grace, please. Everything between us was real. How can I believe that?" Grace asked, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "How can I trust anything you say when you have already shown me you will hide the truth when it suits you?" She walked out of the restaurant, and Nathan felt his world collapse. He had finally found something real, something precious, and his own fear had destroyed it. The dark weeks the following 3 weeks were the worst of Nathan's life. He threw himself back into work, but found no satisfaction in it. His assistants commented that he seemed distracted during important meetings. His board noticed his lack of engagement with strategic initiatives. Nathan could not stop thinking about Grace. He drove past her bookstore multiple times, watching through the window as she helped customers, led story time for children, arranged displays with the same care she had shown at the book fair. She looked thinner, tired, and Nathan hated knowing he had caused her pain. He wanted to reach out, to apologize again, to somehow fix what he had broken. But he knew Grace needed space. Respecting her boundaries was the least he could do after violating her trust. Grace's journey. Grace spent those same weeks trying to untangle her feelings. She was angry, hurt, and confused. But underneath those emotions ran something else. Love. Despite everything, she still loved Nathan. She loved the man who had talked with her about poetry and purpose. The man who had listened to her dreams without judgment. The man who had kissed her, surrounded by books, and made her believe in possibilities. The question was whether that man was real or just a performance. Grace talked with her best friend, processed her feelings, and slowly came to a realization. Nathan had deceived her, yes. But his deception had come from fear, not malice. He had been wrong, absolutely wrong. But he had also shown her who he truly was through his actions over those 6 weeks. He had been genuinely interested in her work. He had respected her boundaries. He had never once tried to impress her with money or power. In fact, he had deliberately chosen to connect with her as an equal, which suggested that equality mattered to him more than the status his wealth could buy. The gesture. For weeks after their confrontation, Grace received a letter at her bookstore. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on simple paper. The letter was from Nathan. In it, he did not make excuses or ask for forgiveness. Instead, he told her about a decision he had made. He had established a foundation specifically to support independent bookstores and small presses. The foundation would provide grants, business support, and resources to people like Grace, who were building community through literature. But here was the crucial part. The foundation was not connected to his name. It would be called the Mitchell Foundation, named after her, and she would have complete control over it if she chose to accept. He would provide the funding, but she would make all decisions about how it was used. "I am not trying to buy your forgiveness," the letter concluded. "I am trying to show you that I learned from my mistake. You taught me that some things matter more than money, that real wealth comes from meaningful work and genuine connection. This foundation is my attempt to honor that lesson, regardless of whether you ever speak to me again. You were right about everything. I should have trusted you with the truth. I should have given you the choice. I failed you, and I am sorry. If you decide to accept this foundation, I will stay completely out of your way. If you decide you want nothing to do with it, or with me, I will understand. But I wanted you to know that loving you changed me, and that change is permanent. Whether we are together or not." Grace read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. The reconciliation. She found Nathan at his office building 2 days later. The receptionist tried to stop her, but Grace was determined. She made it to the executive floor before security caught up with her. Nathan emerged from his office, alerted by the commotion. When he saw Grace, he went completely still. "Can we talk?" Grace asked. Nathan dismissed security, and led her into his office. The space was exactly what she had expected, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, expensive furniture, displays of awards and achievements. But what surprised her were the small touches that revealed the man she had fallen in love with. A bookshelf filled with poetry collections. The pressed flower bookmark from the book he had bought at the fair now framed on his desk. A photograph of them together at the poetry reading, clearly taken without his knowledge. "I got your letter," Grace said. "You do not have to accept the foundation," Nathan said quickly. "I meant what I said. There are no strings attached." "I know," Grace replied. "That is why I am here. Because the Nathan Pierce who wrote that letter is the same Nathan I fell in love with at the book fair. You made a terrible mistake by not telling me the truth. But your mistake came from wanting to protect something real, not from wanting to manipulate or control me." Nathan's breath caught. "Grace, I do not deserve your forgiveness." "Probably not," Grace agreed, a small smile touching her lips. "But I am going to give it to you anyway, because I believe people can learn from their mistakes. I believe the person you became with me is the person you want to be. And I believe we can build something real together if we commit to complete honesty from this point forward." "Complete honesty," Nathan promised. "No more secrets, no more omissions. You deserve to know everything about who I am and what my life looks like. And you deserve to know that I am terrified," Grace admitted. "Terrified of entering your world, of the media attention, of losing myself in the shadow of your wealth and success. We are going to have to figure out how to navigate that together." The new beginning. Nathan crossed the distance between them and took her hands gently. "We will figure it out," he said. "Together, as equals. I do not want you to change or adapt to my world. I want to build a new world with you, one where both of our values matter, where we can be authentic together." They kissed, and this time it felt different. Not the fairy tale perfection of their first kiss, but something more real and sustainable. A beginning built on truth rather than fantasy. Over the following months, they learned to navigate the challenges of their very different worlds. Grace maintained her bookstore and her independence. Nathan scaled back his work commitments to make space for a life beyond business. Together, they launched the Mitchell Foundation, which became a model for supporting independent literary culture. The media attention was difficult at first. Grace struggled with photographers and gossip columns, but Nathan proved his commitment by protecting her privacy fiercely, using his resources to create boundaries rather than to impress or control. Grace introduced Nathan to the richness of a life built on purpose rather than profit. Nathan showed Grace that wealth could be a tool for positive change rather than an end in itself. They challenged each other, supported each other, and built something neither could have created alone. The true wealth won year after their reconciliation. Nathan proposed to Grace in her bookstore, surrounded by the stories that had brought them together. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, chosen with thought rather than expense in mind. "I love you," Nathan said simply. "Not because you complete me or fix me, but because you challenge me to be the best version of myself. Because you saw past the money to the person underneath. Because you had the courage to forgive me when I did not deserve it." "I love you too," Grace replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "All of you, the brilliant businessman and the poetry lover, the billionaire and the man who sits in my bookstore reading 2 children on Saturday mornings. You are all those things, and I love every part of who you are." They married in a simple ceremony, donating what would have been an expensive wedding budget to literacy programs instead. Their life together was not perfect. They still navigated challenges, still had disagreements about how to balance their different worlds. But they faced everything together. With honesty and mutual respect, Nathan learned that true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts, and everything to do with waking up beside someone who loved him for who he was rather than what he had. Grace learned that accepting help and resources did not diminish her independence or achievements. Together, they proved that love could bridge any divide as long as it was built on truth, respect, and the courage to be completely authentic with another person. The man who had hidden behind disguise had found himself through honesty. The woman who had built her world through stories had written the most important chapter of her own life, and they lived not in fairy tale perfection, but in the messy, beautiful reality of two people committed to growing together, supporting each other's dreams, building a life that honored both of their values. Their story became a reminder that the greatest fortune is finding someone who sees you truly and having the courage to let yourself be seen. The end.